The sirens pierced the morning air like screams of metal against metal, their wailing echo bouncing off the pristine houses of Meadowbrook Estates. Fire truck number 7 careened around the corner of Maple Street, its red lights painting frantic shadows across manicured lawns. Behind the wheel, Captain Rodriguez gripped tight, his weathered hands steady despite the urgency radiating through his radio. "Dispatch, we're approaching the scene. What's the nature of this emergency again?" The static crackled before the dispatcher's voice cut through. "Child trapped in unauthorized structure. Requesting immediate extraction. HOA president on scene, demanding compliance action." Rodriguez's brow furrowed. In 23 years of service, he'd seen plenty of unusual calls. But something about this one felt different. Wrong. Even. As the truck rounded the final bend, he caught sight of the scene that would haunt him for months to come. There, nestled in the protective embrace of an ancient oak tree, stood the most magnificent treehouse he'd ever seen. Its crafted wooden walls gleamed honey gold in the morning sun, complete with accessibility ramps, safety railings, and windows that sparkled like jewels. But what made his chest tighten wasn't the beauty of the structure. It was the small figure visible through one of those windows. 9-year-old Timothy Chen pressed his face against the glass, his thin arms wrapped around his favorite stuffed elephant. His legs, weakened by muscular dystrophy, dangled from the custom-built wheelchair that had been specially designed to navigate the treehouse's accessible features. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he watched the growing crowd below, his young mind struggling to comprehend why the adults were shouting about his magical refuge. 3 weeks earlier, Timothy's world had been confined to the 4 walls of his bedroom and the occasional trip to the hospital. The muscular dystrophy had been stealing his strength, piece by piece, each day bringing new challenges that his 9-year-old spirit fought to overcome. His mother, Sarah Chen, worked double shifts as a nurse to cover his medical expenses, leaving Timothy in the care of his grandmother during the long stretches when sterile hospital rooms became his temporary home. The phone call from Make-A-Wish Foundation had changed everything. Sarah's hands trembled as she listened to the coordinator explain that Timothy had been selected for their next project, a fully accessible treehouse that would give him a private sanctuary where he could escape the realities of his condition. The foundation had partnered with master craftsmen, accessibility specialists, and even city planners to ensure every detail met both safety requirements and Timothy's unique needs. "Mom, will it really be mine?" Timothy had asked that night, his voice barely above a whisper. The hope in his eyes was so pure, so desperate, that Sarah had to turn away to hide her own tears. "Yes, sweetheart, it's going to be your very own castle in the sky." The construction had taken 6 weeks. Timothy watched from his bedroom window as volunteers and professionals worked together to create something magical. The oak tree in their backyard, which had stood for over a century, seemed to welcome its new resident. The builders installed a specialized lift system, disguised as a wooden pulley, accessibility ramps that spiraled gently around the trunk, and safety features that exceeded even the most stringent codes. Karen Whitfield had moved to Meadowbrook Estates 18 months prior, with one clear mission: to become the most influential homeowner association president in the county's history. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and designer pantsuits masked a calculating mind that viewed every violation of HOA regulations as a personal affront to her authority. She'd already forced 3 families to repaint their front doors, issued 14 citations for lawn maintenance infractions, and successfully lobbied for a ban on decorative garden gnomes. The treehouse represented her greatest challenge yet. On a Tuesday morning in October, Karen stood in her kitchen, coffee mug in hand, surveying her domain through the bay window. The Chen family's backyard was visible from her elevated position, and the sight of the completed treehouse sent a surge of righteous indignation through her veins. "Absolutely not," she muttered, pulling out her phone to photograph the structure from multiple angles. "This is a clear violation of Section 12.7 of the Architectural Review Guidelines." Her husband, Robert, looked up from his newspaper. "Karen, isn't that the sick kid's treehouse? I heard it was some kind of charity thing." Karen's eyes flashed with irritation. "I don't care if it was built by angels. Robert, rules are rules. This association has standards, and I won't let sentiment override proper governance." Within the hour, Karen had printed out her photographs, highlighted the relevant sections of the HOA covenant, and composed a formal violation notice. She marched across the street with the determination of a general leading troops into battle, her heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown to confrontation. Sarah Chen answered the door with flour still dusting her apron, having spent the morning baking Timothy's favorite cookies to celebrate his first week in the treehouse. The smile on her face faltered when she saw Karen's stern expression and the official-looking papers in her hands. "Mrs. Chen, I'm Karen Whitfield, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I'm here regarding the unauthorized structure in your backyard." Sarah's heart began to race. "I'm sorry. What structure?" "The treehouse. It's in direct violation of our height restrictions, setback requirements, and architectural review process. You have 72 hours to remove it or face legal action." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She gripped the doorframe for support, her mind reeling. "Mrs. Whitfield, that treehouse was built by Make-A-Wish Foundation for my son. He has muscular dystrophy, and—" "I sympathize with your family's situation," Karen interrupted, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But personal circumstances don't exempt anyone from community standards. The structure exceeds our 15-foot height limit by at least 8 feet, and it was constructed without proper HOA approval." Sarah's voice cracked as she tried to explain. "The foundation coordinated with the city. They have all the proper permits. My son is disabled. Mrs. Whitfield, this treehouse is the first place he's ever had that's truly his own." Karen's expression remained unmoved. "Permits from the city don't supersede HOA regulations. Mrs. Chen, I've already consulted with our attorney. You have 3 days." As Karen turned to leave, Sarah called out desperately, "Please, can we discuss this? Maybe there's a compromise." Karen paused, considering. "The only acceptable solution is removal. I suggest you start making arrangements." That evening, Timothy sat in his treehouse, unaware of the storm brewing around his sanctuary. Through the specially installed windows, he could see the entire neighborhood spread out below him like a miniature village. His stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts, sat beside him as he worked on a picture of himself and his mother standing beneath the oak tree, both of them smiling. "Mom says this is my castle," he whispered to Mr. Peanuts. "Do you think real knights lived in castles and trees?" From below, he could hear his mother's voice, tight with stress as she spoke on the phone. The words were muffled, but the emotion was clear, even to his young ears. Something was wrong. Timothy pressed his ear to the floor, trying to understand why his mother sounded so scared. The next morning brought Karen's second assault. She arrived with a measuring tape, a camera, and a clipboard thick with documentation. This time, she brought back up 2 other HOA board members who flanked her like bodyguards as she conducted what she called a compliance inspection. Timothy watched from his bedroom window as the 3 adults swarmed around his treehouse, taking measurements and photographs with the methodical precision of crime scene investigators. His grandmother, Mrs. Lin, stood guard at the back door, her weathered hands clenched into fists. "What are they doing to Timmy's house?" she asked Sarah in Mandarin, her voice sharp with protective anger. Sarah could only shake her head, tears threatening to spill over. "They want us to tear it down. Mama, they say it's against the rules." "Mrs." Lynn's response was swift and colorful, a stream of Mandarin that would have made a sailor blush. She may have been 74 years old, but she'd fought too many battles to let her grandson's happiness become collateral damage in someone else's power game. Karen's inspection lasted 2 hours. She documented every beam, every rail, every safety feature as if it were evidence in a criminal case. When she finally approached the back door, her expression was one of grim satisfaction. "Mrs. Chen, my measurements confirm multiple violations. The structure is 23 feet at its highest point. Well above our limit, it extends beyond the required setback from property lines, and the accessibility features constitute additional structures that weren't approved. My report will be filed with the county tomorrow." Sarah stepped outside, her nurse's training kicking in as she fought to remain calm in a crisis. "Mrs. Whitfield, I've been doing research. The Americans with Disabilities Act has provisions for reasonable accommodations. My son's medical needs—" "Don't quote federal law to me," Karen snapped, her composure cracking slightly. "I know what I'm doing. This is a property values issue. Mrs. Chen, that structure affects every homeowner in this development." "It affects my son's quality of life," Sarah shot back, her voice rising. "Do you have children, Mrs. Whitfield?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Karen's jaw tightened, her perfectly applied lipstick forming a thin line. "My personal life isn't relevant to HOA business. You have 48 hours remaining." As Karen stalked away, Mrs. Lynn stepped onto the porch. Her English was limited, but her message was crystal clear. Bad woman. Very bad woman. Timothy's condition worsened that night. The stress of the adult conflict, combined with the progression of his disease, left him weak and frightened. Sarah sat beside his bed, stroking his hair as his breathing grew labored. "Are they going to take my treehouse away? Mom?" Sarah's heart shattered. How do you explain adult cruelty to a child who's already fighting for every breath? How do you promise protection when you feel powerless yourself? "I'm going to do everything I can to save it. Baby, I promise." But promises felt fragile in the face of Karen's determination. The next morning brought a process server to Sarah's door. Official legal documents that made Karen's threats terrifyingly real. The language was dense with legal terminology. But the message was clear: remove the structure within 24 hours or face court proceedings that could result in fines of up to $5,000 per day. Sarah called the Make-A-Wish Foundation in desperation. But it was Saturday, and the office was closed. She tried reaching the construction coordinator, the city planning office, anyone who might have documentation proving the treehouse's legitimacy. Every call went to voicemail. Every email received an automatic response promising attention on the next business day. Karen, meanwhile, was having the most productive weekend of her HOA presidency. She'd consulted with 2 different attorneys, filed preliminary paperwork with the county, and even reached out to a demolition company for quotes. Her husband watched nervously as she paced their living room, her energy manic and focused. "Karen, maybe you should slow down. The kid is sick, and—" "Robert, stop. I've explained this. If I make exceptions for one family, what's to stop others from ignoring our covenants? Property values in this neighborhood have increased 12% since I took office. That's not an accident." Sunday evening arrived with the weight of a death sentence. Timothy had spent the day in his treehouse, trying to memorize every detail the way the afternoon light filtered through the leaves. the sound of birds nesting in the higher branches, the feeling of being above the world and all its complications. He'd brought up his art supplies and spent hours drawing pictures of his sanctuary, as if capturing it on paper might somehow make it permanent. Sarah climbed up to join him, her legs shaking from more than just the physical exertion. Through the treehouse windows, she could see Karen's house, lights burning bright as their neighbor prepared for battle. "Timothy, sweetheart, we might have to say goodbye to the treehouse for a little while." Timothy's pencil stopped moving across the paper. "Forever." "I don't know. Baby, I'm still fighting for it." Timothy set aside his drawing and looked at his mother with eyes far too old for his 9 years. "It's okay, Mom. I got to be a knight for a little while. That's more than some kids get." Sarah broke down then, her composed nurse's facade crumbling as she gathered her son into her arms. They sat together in his magical castle, both of them crying for different reasons, Timothy for the loss of his dream, Sarah for the injustice of a world that could be so cruel to innocence. Monday morning dawned gray and threatening, storm clouds gathering like witnesses to the coming conflict. Karen arrived at the Chen residence at precisely 8 o'clock. Accompanied by a building inspector she'd managed to summon through her network of municipal connections. She wore her best power suit and carried a briefcase that seemed to contain the weight of absolute authority. Sarah met them at the front door, her face pale but determined. She'd been up all night making phone calls, sending emails, and researching legal precedents. Her mother instinct had kicked into overdrive, transforming her from an overwhelmed single parent into a fierce protector. "Mrs. Whitfield, I need more time. I'm waiting for documentation from Make-A-Wish that proves the treehouse was properly approved." Karen's smile was cold and professional. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen, but deadlines exist for a reason. Mr. Patterson here is from the county building department. He's been briefed on the situation." The building inspector, a tired-looking man in his 50s, seemed uncomfortable with his role in the drama. "Ma'am, I'll need to examine the structure and determine if it meets current safety codes. If it doesn't, I'll have to issue a condemnation order." Sarah's heart sank. She could see Timothy watching from his bedroom window. Mr. Peanuts clutched tight in his arms. Her son's face was pressed against the glass, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. The inspection took 30 minutes. Patterson climbed the accessibility ramps, tested the safety railings, and examined every joint and beam with professional thoroughness. Karen followed close behind, pointing out what she perceived as violations while taking notes on her tablet. When they emerged from the treehouse, Patterson's expression was troubled. "Mrs. Chen, the construction quality is exceptional. I've rarely seen this level of craftsmanship in residential structures. However, I do have concerns about the permitting process." Karen pounced on his words like a cat on a mouse. "So you agree, there are violations?" Patterson hesitated. "The structure appears to have been built to commercial safety standards, which actually exceed residential requirements, but without proper documentation of the approval process. I can't verify compliance with local zoning ordinances." Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "How long do I have to get that documentation?" "Typically, I'd allow 2 weeks for paperwork clarification. However, Mrs. Whitfield has indicated this is an urgent safety concern requiring immediate action." Karen's victory smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Patterson, as HOA president, I'm requesting immediate enforcement. This structure poses a liability risk to the entire community." The inspector looked between the two women, clearly caught in the middle of something that had moved far beyond building codes and zoning laws. "I'll need to make some calls. Can we reconvene this afternoon?" As Patterson and Karen walked back to their cars, Sarah noticed her neighbors beginning to emerge from their houses. Word had spread through the development's informal network, and small clusters of residents gathered on sidewalks and driveways. Their conversations hushed but intense. Mrs. Rodriguez from 2 houses down approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Mija, we heard what's happening. This is wrong. That woman is wrong." The afternoon brought no relief. Patterson returned with reinforcements, a county supervisor, and a legal representative, who explained that, without proper documentation, the treehouse would need to be declared a public nuisance pending resolution of the permitting questions. Karen stood apart from the growing crowd of neighbors, her arms crossed in satisfaction. She'd achieved her goal through proper channels and legal procedures. The fact that a disabled child would lose his sanctuary was simply collateral damage in the larger war for community standards. That evening, Sarah made the phone call she'd been dreading. Timothy listened from his treehouse as his mother spoke to someone about professional removal services and minimal damage to the host tree. The adult words didn't make complete sense to him, but their meaning was clear enough. Tuesday morning brought the demolition crew. Timothy had spent the night in his treehouse, refusing to come down despite his mother's gentle pleas. He'd arranged his drawings on the floor around him like a protective circle, each picture a memory he was trying to preserve. Mr. Peanuts sat in his lap as he watched the sun rise through the oak leaves, painting everything in shades of gold and green. The sound of heavy equipment arriving shattered the morning quiet. Timothy pressed his face to the window and saw men in hard hats unloading chainsaws and climbing gear from a large truck. Their voices carried up to him, professional and matter-of-fact, as they discussed the best approach for removing the structure without damaging the tree. "There's a kid up there," one of them called out. "Someone needs to get him down." Sarah emerged from the house, her face streaked with tears she'd been fighting all night. "Timothy, sweetheart, you have to come down now. Please." But Timothy shook his head, his small hands gripping the window frame. "I want to stay with my castle. Mom, please don't make me leave." The demolition foreman, a burly man named Jake, who'd been in the business for 20 years, found himself in an impossible situation. He'd torn down hundreds of structures, but never with a disabled child refusing to evacuate. His own grandson was about Timothy's age, and the parallel made his stomach turn. "Ma'am, I can't start work with the boy up there. It's not safe. And frankly, I don't have the heart for it." Karen appeared at that moment, having timed her arrival to coincide with the demolition. She dressed carefully for the occasion, wanting to project authority and resolve as she supervised the enforcement of community standards. "Mr. Williams, we discussed this yesterday. The structure needs to be removed today. If the child won't come down voluntarily, we'll need to involve emergency services." Jake stared at her in disbelief. "Lady, you want me to call the fire department to drag a sick kid out of a treehouse so I can tear down his playhouse? What kind of person are you?" Karen's composure cracked slightly. "I'm a person who believes in following the law. Mr. Williams, this is a legal order signed by a county supervisor. If you can't do your job, I'll find someone who can." The standoff continued for 2 hours. Timothy remained in his treehouse, growing weaker as the stress and exertion took their toll on his frail body. Sarah stood at the base of the oak tree, calling up encouragement while battling her own despair. Mrs. Lynn had positioned herself between the demolition crew and the tree, her small frame radiating protective fury as she muttered in Mandarin. More neighbors gathered. The Johnsons brought folding chairs and bottled water. The Martinez family set up a small tent on the sidewalk. Word had spread through social media, and people Sarah had never met began arriving to offer support. The crowd grew from a handful of concerned neighbors to nearly 50 people, all united in their opposition to what they saw as institutional bullying. Karen watched the growing protest with increasing alarm. This wasn't how community leadership was supposed to work. Rules were meant to be followed, not debated by mobs of emotional residents. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911. Emergency Services. This is Karen Whitfield, President of Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. I have a child refusing to evacuate from a condemned structure, and I need immediate assistance. The 911 operator, trained to prioritize genuine emergencies, asked for clarification. Ma'am, is the child in immediate physical danger? The structure is unsafe and needs to be demolished. The child is preventing legal enforcement of a county order. I'll dispatch a unit to assess the situation. 20 minutes later, the sirens began. Fire truck number 7 rounded the corner with Captain Rodriguez at the wheel, the same veteran who'd responded to Karen's initial call weeks earlier. This time, he knew exactly what he was walking into, and his jaw was set with grim determination. Behind the fire truck came a police cruiser, an ambulance, and what appeared to be half the local news media. Someone in the crowd had contacted Channel 7, and their news van arrived just as the emergency vehicles were parking. Rodriguez climbed out of his truck and surveyed the scene. A small crowd of residents, a demolition crew standing idle, expensive equipment sitting unused, and in the center of it all, a magnificent treehouse with a little boy visible through its windows. Karen rushed to meet him, her prepared speech flowing in a torrent of legal justifications and procedural requirements. Rodriguez listened with the patience of a man who'd heard every possible excuse for wasting emergency resources. But his eyes never left the treehouse. Captain Rodriguez, thank you for responding so quickly. As I explained to dispatch, we have a child who's refusing to evacuate from a condemned structure. I need your department's assistance in ensuring his safe removal so we can proceed with the court-ordered demolition. Rodriguez studied Karen's face, noting the flush of excitement beneath her makeup, the way her hands trembled slightly as she gestured toward the treehouse. This wasn't fear for a child's safety. This was the adrenaline of someone who believed victory was within reach. Ma'am, before we proceed, I need to understand the nature of the emergency. Is the structure unstable? Is there immediate danger to the child? Karen's answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. The building inspector identified multiple code violations. The structure exceeds height limits and wasn't properly permitted. It needs to be removed for public safety. Rodriguez walked to the base of the oak tree and looked up at Timothy, who was still visible through the treehouse windows. The boy looked scared, but not injured, and the structure itself appeared to be built with exceptional care and attention to safety. Son, Rodriguez called up. Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention? Timothy's voice drifted down, thin but clear. I'm okay, sir. I just don't want to leave my castle. The fire captain turned back to Karen, his expression hardening. Mrs. Whitfield, this isn't an emergency situation. That boy isn't in immediate danger. And frankly, that treehouse looks safer than half the residential structures I've seen. I'm not authorizing an extraction. Karen's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. Captain Rodriguez, I am the president of this homeowners association. I have legal authority here, and I'm ordering you to remove that child. Rodriguez's voice went deadly quiet. Ma'am, you don't order me to do anything. I take orders from the fire chief, the mayor, and God Almighty. In that order, you're not on the list. The crowd of neighbors began to murmur their approval, and Karen realized she was losing control of the situation. She pulled out her phone again, this time calling her attorney on speaker so everyone could hear. David, it's Karen Whitfield. I'm at the Chen property with emergency services, and they're refusing to enforce the county order. I need you to contact whoever you need to contact to get this situation resolved immediately." The attorney's voice crackled through the phone speaker. Tinny, but authoritative. "Karen, slow down. Are you telling me you called the fire department to remove a child from a treehouse? It's a condemned structure. David, we've been through this. Do you have documentation proving the structure is unsafe?" Karen hesitated. The building inspector said there were permitting issues. Permitting issues aren't the same as safety violations. Karen, I think you need to step back and let me handle this through proper legal channels. But Karen was too invested in victory to retreat now. She hung up on her attorney and turned to address the crowd directly, her voice rising to carry over the murmur of disapproval. "I know this seems harsh, but rules exist for a reason. If we let one family ignore our covenants, what's to stop others from doing whatever they want? Property values, community standards. The very concept of organized society depends on everyone following the same rules." Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward from the crowd, her voice shaking with emotion. "That's a sick little boy up there. Lady, where's your heart?" Other voices joined in, the crowd's anger building like a gathering storm. Karen found herself surrounded by neighbors she'd considered allies, their faces filled with disgust and disappointment. The news cameras captured every moment, the reporter's voice providing running commentary that would make Karen infamous by evening. It was at that moment that the silver Mercedes pulled up to the curb. Dr. Rebecca Morrison, Regional Director of Make-A-Wish Foundation, emerged from the driver's seat with the controlled urgency of someone who'd been fielding crisis calls all morning. She'd driven straight from her office in the state capitol, bringing with her a briefcase full of documentation that would change everything. Behind her came a second car, then a third. Representatives from the construction company, city planning officials, and what appeared to be several very official-looking people in expensive suits. The small neighborhood drama was suddenly populated with players who operated on a much larger stage. Dr. Morrison approached the scene with the calm authority of someone accustomed to navigating complex bureaucratic waters. She assessed the situation quickly: the fire trucks, the demolition equipment, the crowd of angry neighbors, and, most importantly, the small boy still visible in his treehouse. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I'm Dr. Rebecca Morrison from Make-A-Wish Foundation. I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding here." Karen whirled around, seeing both salvation and catastrophe in the arrival of official representatives. If Make-A-Wish could provide proper documentation, her legal position might crumble. But if they couldn't, their presence would only add weight to her argument about following proper procedures. "Dr. Morrison, I'm Karen Whitfield, HOA President. We've been trying to resolve a permitting issue with the structure your organization built. Unfortunately, proper approvals weren't obtained, and—" "Dr." Morrison held up a hand, stopping Karen mid-sentence. She opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder of documents, her expression growing more serious as she flipped through the pages. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm looking at comprehensive documentation for the Timothy Chen Accessibility Treehouse project. City permits, county approvals, structural engineering reports, safety certifications, and a specific variance granted for humanitarian accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act." The crowd fell silent. Even the news cameras seemed to pause, waiting for the revelation that everyone sensed was coming. "Dr." Morrison continued, her voice growing harder with each word. "More importantly, I have correspondence from your HOA board dated 6 weeks ago, acknowledging receipt of our construction plans and explicitly approving the project as a community service initiative. Karen's face went pale. That's impossible. I never approved any such project. The approval came from the previous board president, Mrs. Catherine Mills. 2 weeks before you assumed office, the documentation was filed with the county and copied to your association's management company. Doctor, Morrison handed the papers to Captain Rodriguez, who scanned them quickly before passing them to the building inspector, who'd been standing nervously at the edge of the crowd. Patterson studied the documents with growing amazement. These are comprehensive city approvals, including a specific exemption for the height variance due to ADA accommodation requirements. This structure is not only legal, it's been pre-approved by every relevant authority. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen stood frozen, her mind racing through the implications of what she was hearing. If the Treehouse had proper approvals, if the previous board had signed off on the project, if Make-A-Wish had followed every legal requirement, then her entire crusade had been built on a foundation of ignorance and misplaced authority. Dr. Morrison wasn't finished. She turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand what happened here. 6 weeks ago, Make-A-Wish Foundation, in partnership with Master Builders United and the City Planning Department, began construction of a fully accessible treehouse for 9-year-old Timothy Chen, who suffers from muscular dystrophy. Every aspect of this project was approved, inspected, and certified by the appropriate authorities. She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering the devastating conclusion. Mrs. Whitfield called emergency services to forcibly remove a disabled child from a legally constructed, professionally inspected, Make-A-Wish Foundation gift because she failed to review the files inherited from her predecessor. The crowd's reaction was immediate and volcanic. Voices rose in anger. Neighbors who'd been trying to maintain civility finally expressing their true feelings about Karen's crusade. The news cameras captured every moment, the reporter's commentary providing context that would ensure this story reached far beyond the boundaries of Meadowbrook Estates. Karen tried to salvage something from the wreckage of her position. I was protecting property values. I was following established procedures. How was I supposed to know about approvals that weren't properly communicated? Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, his patience finally exhausted. Mrs. Whitfield, you called emergency services to remove a disabled child from a legal structure because you couldn't be bothered to check your own files. In 23 years of service, this is the most shameful waste of public resources I've ever witnessed. Dr. Morrison's phone rang, and she answered it with visible relief. Sarah, yes. I'm here. Timothy is fine. Sweetheart. He can stay in his treehouse for as long as he wants. From above, Timothy's voice drifted down, stronger now that the adults had stopped shouting. Mom, can I come down now? I want to meet the nice lady who saved my castle. The crowd watched as Timothy activated the treehouse's accessibility lift, the mechanical system humming quietly as it lowered him to ground level. Sarah rushed to embrace her son, tears of relief streaming down her face as she held him tight. Dr. Morrison knelt down to Timothy's level, her professional composure softening as she looked into his bright, curious eyes. Hello, Timothy. I'm Rebecca. I'm sorry you had such a scary morning. Timothy considered this with the seriousness that only children can bring to adult problems. Are you going to let me keep my castle? Absolutely. It's yours forever. As the emergency vehicles began to pack up and leave, as the demolition crew loaded their unused equipment, as neighbors drifted back to their houses with stories they'd tell for years, Karen found herself standing alone in the street that had been her kingdom just hours before. The silver Mercedes was pulling away when Dr. Morrison rolled down her window for one final comment. Mrs. Whitfield. Make-A-Wish Foundation will be conducting a full review of this incident. Attempting to destroy a disabled child's accommodation gift may have legal implications beyond your HOA authority. The next morning brought consequences that Karen hadn't anticipated. Her phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and angry residents. The story had gone viral overnight, turning her from a local authority figure into a national symbol of petty bureaucracy run amok. Robert packed his bags after breakfast, his patience finally exhausted by years of living with Karen's need to control everything around her. "I'm going to stay with my brother for a while. When you figure out how to be human again, give me a call." The emergency HOA board meeting was called for that evening. Karen arrived to find the community center packed with residents she'd governed for 18 months, their faces uniformly hostile. The motion to remove her from office passed unanimously, with Karen casting the only dissenting vote. Mrs. Catherine Mills, the previous president who'd approved the Treehouse project, stood to address the crowd. "I want everyone to know that the Chen family's Treehouse was one of the most rewarding projects I've ever been involved with. The fact that Karen nearly destroyed it due to her own negligence is a disgrace to everything our community should represent." But the legal consequences were just beginning. Make-A-Wish Foundation, backed by their legal team and media attention from across the country, filed a federal lawsuit alleging harassment and discrimination against a disabled child. The city planning department launched an investigation into Karen's abuse of emergency services. Most devastating of all, her insurance company refused to cover any legal costs, citing her actions as outside the scope of her HOA duties. Timothy, meanwhile, spent the autumn afternoons in his treehouse, drawing pictures and watching the leaves change colors. The trauma of the demolition attempt faded, as children's trauma often does, replaced by the simple joy of having a magical place that was truly his own. Sarah found herself overwhelmed by support from neighbors she'd barely known before the crisis. The Martinez family brought dinner twice a week. Mrs. Rodriguez helped with Timothy's physical therapy. The Johnsons offered to maintain the oak tree and treehouse during the winter months. In November, 3 months after the sirens and chaos, Timothy celebrated his 10th birthday in his treehouse. 50 neighbors attended the party, transforming the backyard into a festival of lights and laughter. Dr. Morrison drove down from the state capitol to attend, bringing a special gift, a plaque that would be mounted on the treehouse door. Timothy's Castle. It read, "Built with love by Make-A-Wish Foundation and the Meadowbrook Estates community, a place where dreams come true and kindness conquers all." Karen watched the party from her bedroom window, the divorce papers scattered across her desk, alongside bills from lawyers she could no longer afford. The federal lawsuit was moving forward, and early estimates suggested she might lose her house to pay the damages. Her crusade for community standards had cost her everything that mattered. As winter settled over Meadowbrook Estates, Timothy's treehouse stood like a beacon in the oak tree's bare branches. String lights twinkled through the windows, and, on clear nights, neighbors could see his shadow moving around inside, playing with Mr. Peanuts or working on his drawings. The treehouse had survived Karen's assault and emerged stronger than before. Much like the community itself, the neighbors who'd rallied to Timothy's defense discovered bonds that went deeper than property lines and HOA covenants. They'd learned that some things childhood dreams, human dignity, the protection of the vulnerable, mattered more than rules written by people who'd forgotten how to see past their own ambitions. On Christmas Eve, Timothy invited the entire neighborhood to his treehouse for hot chocolate and carol singing. The accessibility lift made multiple trips, carrying up neighbors young and old to share the view from his castle in the sky. As snow began to fall, coating the oak tree's branches in pristine white. Sarah looked around at the faces gathered in her son's magical refuge. These were the faces of a real community, not the artificial construct Karen had tried to enforce through regulations and intimidation, but the organic bonds formed when people choose to care for each other's children, protect each other's dreams, and stand together against those who would diminish the light in a small boy's eyes. Timothy raised his cup of hot chocolate in a toast, his voice clear and strong despite the disease that would eventually claim his strength. Thank you for saving my castle. Thank you for being my knights. The treehouse glowed in the falling snow, a testament to the power of community, the importance of compassion, and the truth that some battles are worth fighting regardless of the cost. In years to come, long after Timothy had outgrown his castle in the sky, neighbors would still point to the oak tree and tell the story of the boy who taught an entire community what it meant to stand up for what's right. Karen's house went up for sale in February. A for sale sign, standing like a white flag of surrender in the yard, where she'd once surveyed her domain with such confidence. The new owners, a young couple with twins, would bring laughter back to the property and cookies to the Chen family every Sunday after church. And in the oak tree, Timothy's treehouse stood as it always would, not just as a playhouse for one special boy, but as a monument to the truth that love, properly applied, can overcome any obstacle, silence any bully, and transform any community willing to fight for its children's dreams. The sirens had long since faded into memory, but their echo remained in the hearts of everyone who'd witnessed the morning when emergency services came not to rescue a child from danger, but to protect one woman's petty authority from the inconvenience of a disabled boy's happiness. It was a lesson Meadowbrook Estates would never forget, carved into the community's memory as permanently as Timothy's name was carved into the oak tree's trunk, surrounded by a heart and the simple words that had started it all: Make-A-Wish Foundation. Dreams come true here.